Hey, it's Filbert, and during a Game Dave stream,
Well, I think it's music time.
hashtag not a sponsor, the community came up with a bunch of like AI songs we're making a part of the theme of the month, and one of the songs called Pixelated Sadness, made by Miss Moon, hit many of us in the feels.
Throughout the ages to change 1999, singing in an opera for the very first time. Oh, how I cried when the flower girl died. My best friends with me by my side, popping each other's balloons, racing to the finish line for bragging rights. I know I can't spend my life looking behind, but what a ride. I got that pixelated sadness. Got that pixelated sadness.
Now, Miss Moon later on stream asked, what were some people's most impactful games as kids growing up? And I thought this would be a good time to answer that. And I also recommend checking out the description of the channel. I'll have a link to Miss Moon's Pixelated Sadness. If you want to listen to the song in full, I highly recommend it. The song may be generated by AI, but those lyrics are not. As I've been writing the script, I've been really trying to focus on what impacted me as a kid and a teenager. Not just games I'm nostalgic for or just have good memories with, but specifically games that opened up my views about concepts of what a game could be when it came to music, gameplay, storytelling, mechanics, and a few times even aspects of life, which I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end of the video. Now, some of these were very obvious at times, like one later on I'll be talking about with Final Fantasy VI is the music. Like the first time some of those songs I heard, like that was instant. I could recognize like this is different, this is really good, I want to listen to more of this. But a lot of this stuff is more subtle things that I didn't have an epiphany at the time playing the game or watching it played, but moments, maybe a specific memory, but moments of the game just stuck with me, and I'll go back and think about. And you know, as you grow up and mature later in life, you reflect on some of the stuff and you realize like the impact it did actually mold or shape you with. I'm going to try and keep this in chronological order in terms of how and when I would have experienced this. For some context, I was born in 1989. I grew up with both the Nintendo and Super Nintendo. So I played a lot more Nintendo as a kid just because we had probably like 30 games compared to, I think we had like 7 or 8 in Super Nintendo. And that was like the same with all my friends. Everyone just had like 3 or 4 times the amount of Nintendo games as Super Nintendo games. I'm also the youngest of 5. Now my, not to go into too much detail, but my, I have 3 older brothers. They're all half brothers. One of them lived with me and my sister like our entire life from when I was a kid all the way until we all graduated. The other 2 lived with us during sporadic moments, usually when they were getting too much trouble living with the dad. They'll live with, we all share the same mom. They'll live with my parents, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for a year or 2. So that always changed. But because of that, I experienced a lot of things they were into. And that not just games, but like a lot of things. And I also, because of that, I never really had like that like kiddie phase. I watched like very little like and played very little stuff that was meant just for like little kids. Like I'm talking like Barney or something, because my older siblings were into stuff like that. So either I wasn't because I wanted to be what they were into, or you know, we're kids and they would like make fun of me, like, you're watching Barney, even though it's, you know, like 4. And I'd be like, oh yeah, Barney, I'm not gonna watch that because I don't want to get made fun of. So I'd watch what they're into. So because of that, some of the games I'll be covering are things that I think I experienced a few years earlier than I probably otherwise would have, or I maybe never would have experienced, because I was really outside the demographic of the game. Now, I have no memory of like the first time I actually played a game or what game that would have been, but if I had to guess, it was almost certainly Super Mario Brothers, or something else on original Nintendo. But the first game, and it's kind of games that impacted me, was Mario Brothers, specifically Mario 1, Mario 3, and Mario World. These are all games I grew up with, grew up playing, and I'm. This is partly here because, again, I don't know specifically, but when I think back of like the earliest memories of gaming it's usually Mario and Kirby. So these are the Mario games are what likely just introduced me to games. And like looking at my shelf, and you can't see I have stuff on the shelf over here. Games are a big part of me. Behind me I have a bunch of board games, and there's a bunch of board games in the room over there. But video game, board games, and just gaming as a hobby is a big part of who I am. And a lot of that is because the impact these early games had on me. And when it comes to Mario, I also want to highlight it because this is the first time I remember coming up with headcanon. I don't know how many other people did this, but like when I was like little, me and my friends would be playing on like a jungle gym or swing set. And a lot of times you'd be, doing this with like games or movies like G.I. Joe or something, but you'd be in your head where it's like, all right, we're like Mario and Luigi, or we're just like in the Mario universe, whatever you think as a kid, and it's like the Koopas are attacking. And headcanon I remember coming up with was we recognize like Koopas in the game have different shell colors, and like to us as kids that meant something. So me and my friends almost had like an organization chart in our head where like greens were like the most basic grunt Koopa, because like they're like the first ones you come across, and then like red were more powerful, and blue were like the leaders of the red. So we'll be playing and be like, oh, Koopas are attacking, you know, in our imagination, and we'd like say like what color it is, and it would always start with like the green, and but you'd ramp it up like red ones are attacking, and then like blue ones are attacking, and that was like escalated stuff. And that went with a lot of aspects. Like we would just be, you know, kids talking about the game, and you know, and you talk about games now as adults, a lot of times you're talking about mechanics and gameplay and like the story elements. But as kids, in my circles, we would like talk about lore. We would like come up with lore. Like in Mario Brothers 3, I remember us talking about how the different kingdoms must be like allied and friends, and how power-ups, like certain power-ups must come from like this, like the Sand Kingdom. We were like, that's where the whistles must come from, and the frog suit must originate from the Water Kingdom. So like the people who live there use the frog suits all the time. And so I do think the Mario series, specifically those early games, I never did play 2 back then, had a big impact and like imagination for me, because we used to just run wild with what we would come up with playing, whether it's like action figures, toys on the ground, or like outside on jungle gyms fighting off Bowser and his underling. Now, before I move on from the NES, I do want to also talk about Kirby, because again, I mentioned that was likely one of the other earliest games I played, just because it was so easy to pick up and play as a kid. And I remember getting to King Dedede, and I just always thought he was like a very cool villain in a lot of ways. But when you fight King Dedede and you end up beating him, he becomes pretty pathetic. And it's the first time I can recall feeling bad for a villain and wanting them to have redemption. And in the game, he does have redemption. He does like help Kirby by like sucking him up and launch him in the air at the end to fight like the nightmare and everything. And I just, that was like another impact I had with me, was I was happy to see like he didn't get defeated and turn to a puff of smoke or explode and go away. But like this villain, there was more to him. And I really liked as a kid that he wasn't all bad, and there was like redemption for him. And again, as a kid, I didn't like articulate this or fully understand it. I just knew I liked it. Now, as I move on to Windows 3.1, we had a Packard Bell Legends computer, and this is going to be a little bit of a rapid fire. All these left impacts on me. clearly because I remember them all these years later, like very vividly. But if you've been on my Twitch, I have a bunch of old full motion videos of a character called Lance Boyle, played by Christian Eriksen from the game Mega Race.
All in one spectacular race. Viewers, if you're watching the repeat, please don't phone in to tell me the answer. I hate it when they ruin the suspense.
Because Mega Race was a game we had on our Packer Bell, and it was, again, probably the first full motion video game I seen or played, and it blew me away as a kid. I remember thinking, like, this looks as good as TV. This looks as good as movies. Now, I recommend, if you like full motion videos, especially like Camp and Cheese, Christian just chews up the scenery. But as a kid, I didn't realize that. A lot of that like flies over your head as a kid. I just thought this was awesome. It's also the first video game I ever heard a swear word.
To think the good people of Terminal City are the constant victims of cynical self-seekers, that makes me mad as hell.
And I remember me and my brothers always being excited to get to that moment. Like, he says hell. But there's a few other games I want to point out from this like little era and playing on this computer. And a lot of those come back to the knowledge adventure games. And I think like a bunch of people, this must have been a pack-in with these computers, but you got like 3D Dinosaur Adventure, 3D Body Adventure, Speed, Space, Underwater Adventure. And a lot of these piqued my interest in a lot of these subjects. I became very fascinated with like space because of the space one, which continued even into my adulthood. But again, as a little kid, dinosaurs, like that was one of the coolest things ever. Having a game with dinosaurs in it and you can learn about them. And I would browse through like the in-game encyclopedia for just long durations, like 30, 40 minutes at a time, I'm sure.
Plateosaurus, or flat reptile, was one of the first large plant-eating dinosaurs, known as prosauropods.
And I was just blown away by the minigames and the full motion videos of some of these games.
Knows what dinosaurs were like. It's possible that a meeting between a Tyrannosaurus and a Triceratops might have gone like this. Not.
Hey, there's Triceratops.
Oh, no, not this guy again.
Hey, Triceratops, I think there's something on your shoulder. Here, let me help you with it.
Listen, Rex.
yeah.
How you doing? Look, why don't you just go bother somebody else, okay? Like, I saw a Stegosaurus a couple miles back. I think that would be great if you would just go bug him.
Stop away.
Stop it.
Down to your
It's
chin.
nothing
Down to your
on
chin.
my back.
Yeah, right under there. No. Hold still. Let me see.
Back off. Thank you. Look. Why do you always have to pick on me? I don't like it. No. Don't touch me.
I know it.
I don't want to be touched.
I'm gonna grab it
all
for you,
right?
okay? I'll
You
grab
can't
it.
hurt
With
me.
my forearms.
Get
Got away. Fooled you. Got you down again. What's this? I got something on my teeth.
And man, some of these games kind of have a dark sense of humor looking back at it. And an honorable mention to Time Commando 2, which I would have played around this time, but probably on Windows 98. And simply because, and this is definitely stupid, but it's the first game I saw boobs in. And I'm not just saying that it's like be funny, even it is funny, but I remember I was not expecting it. I was playing this game, and there's this Roman statue. You're in the Roman times, and the statue that goes by, and it's like detailed women's breast. And when I seen that was probably the first time I had just like a hit of adrenaline, and it was because I was like, our computer is like in an open space where like anyone could kind of see what you're doing, and it was like panic because it's just like this would really be like one of the first times I've seen like boobs, because I was probably 8 or so at the time, 7 or 8, and I was like, I know I will get in trouble if like mom and dad see this. And I instantly like whipped by that scene because I was like terrified to turn around for a second because I thought they're gonna see me. And again, this is like a little impact and a moment, but I just want to point out, because it was like one of the biggest adrenaline shots I think I'd probably ever got at that time in my life, was just like, I can't let my parents know that this is in the game, or the game is going to get taken away from me. Moving on to the Super Nintendo, one of the games that has had the biggest impact on me is Final Fantasy III. I mean, Final Fantasy VI. In the 90s, I was on a personal crusade to call it Final Fantasy III, because that's what it was called here, god damn it. But I've long since made peace with that and call it Final Fantasy VI, because that's the game it really is. Now, I have so much to say about this game, it probably deserves its own video by me. But I'm gonna kind of just touch the big topics I have to say about this. And when this game came out, I would have been 5, so I was not old enough to really comprehend a lot of the game, even like a lot of the reading. But I had older brothers, and they were obsessed with this game. So my first couple years of this game, were not playing it. I wasn't behind the controller. I was watching them play it, and again, this is a little bit nostalgia too, but. Like, my brothers used to like read the dialogue to me, and I would ask them questions about like, wait, why did this person do that, or why did this just happen, and they would explain it to me. And in a lot of ways, you don't have to play it. If you sit there next to the person playing the entire time, like, you get most of the experience. And I think a lot of us have had those experiences with friends, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, when you just go over to a buddy's house and sit by them and just watch them play their game. And a lot of times you got almost the same experience they did. So that's what Final Fantasy VI was for me. And I did eventually play it a few years later, probably when I was like 8 or 9. But the first thing I want to touch on, and again, you didn't need to play this to experience it, was the music. This was 100% the first time I played a game where like the music had a major impact on me. Like, I wanted to hear the music. It would swell up like emotion in me. There would be times like I would go to an area in the game, like when I was a little bit later playing it, and just like get to a town or get to a battle and just let the music just play and listen to it. Many people at this game, the opera scene for a long time was like my favorite moment ever in a video game. As a little kid, 5, 6, I was like memorized by that scene and what was going on. It really opened up my mind. And again, this wasn't like an epiphany I had as a kid. I was too young to articulate it, but it stuck with me so long that I would always go back and think about it. And it really opened my mind to how powerful music can be in a medium and how much it can drive emotion. 6 as well. Sabin was the first character like I saw myself in. He was the first character I ever had a game where I had a self-insert. I wanted to be like him. I would sometimes name myself after him. I was really weird about naming characters. I still kind of am, but especially back like Final Fantasy like 6, 7, I was like, oh, I gotta preserve the original name of the character. So I rarely did actually change the names, but like Sabin was me in that game. And we can't talk about this game without bringing up Kefka. And he is, again, probably the first like iconic villain I had. I became just fascinated with him again as a kid. From his looks, his humor, the evil acts he had. I wanted him to be redeemed like King Dedede and Kirby as a kid. I remember I was like, come on, like, I wanted there to be a way for him to come around and be redeemed. And I always liked like the middle of the game when it almost seems like he has a little bit of a change and he like kind of like gets arrested and everything. But Kefka was like the first villain that wasn't just like a bit of a buffoon. Like, he was serious, he was scary. I think there's a lot of argument about like, is he complex? Is he simple? I think there's like a mix of both. I think in a lot of ways he's chaos incarnate. But there's like complexity to his history, but not like him in the present of the game. Spoilers if you haven't played it, which I highly recommend it, but skip ahead like 30 seconds if you do not want spoilers and you haven't played the game. But when the game gets to the world of ruin, like, I felt awful. As a kid, I just never wanted it to happen. I always was trying to find a way or hoping there's a way to fix it, stop it from happening, or revert the world back. And again, kind of a lot of the messaging and the theme of the game is holding on to hope. And as an adult, I've always like reflected on that and really took that away from the game. Again, left impact on me. And this again was like the first time in a game for me that I ever seen like the good guys fail. Like you fail in that game and you kind of have a little bit of like a moral victory at the end. It's more than a moral victory because you do Kefka like at the end just gonna finish off everything, but you fail. But there's more to look forward to. You know, look what's worth saving next and what's worth rebuilding. And playing that game, watching it be played, that just always stuck with me even before I could articulate it, and definitely after the fact as well. Now, for major impacts, there wasn't really much more on the SNES for me. A couple of the big games like Chrono Trigger I never played. I still need to play that game. I know that's like a huge video game sin. But yeah, we're going to move on to the PlayStation 1. And we'll keep on Final Fantasy 7. No, we'll keep on Final Fantasy with Final Fantasy 7. And again, this was the first game I remember that was an event. Me and my friends were talking about it, and again, this is when I'm kind of old enough to start getting in the zeitgeist of like culture and everything. But me and my friends were talking about this game pre-release, probably the first game I ever remember talking about before it was even out. I still have a vivid memory of my mom buying groceries and coming home with like a big like 24 box case of Pepsi, and Cloud was on the side, and that like blew me away. I was just like, there is a video game character on that box of Pepsi. Now, when it came to Final Fantasy VII, much like Final Fantasy VI, I watched my brothers play it way before I played it. I know I say way before it, probably like a year. So I never have owned a PlayStation 1, even to this day. But my best friend at the time had a PlayStation 1, and I used to go over. He's like one of those friends where we were over at each other's houses like every weekend for like years. So I was playing a lot of games over there, and then my oldest brother had moved in probably the summer of 1998 and lived with us for like 2 years at the time, and he had a PlayStation. So I used to watch him play it a lot, and I probably got my hands on it sometime in 1999 is probably when I first actually played it myself, but I watched him play it from disc 1 to disc 3. I still think 6 has a fantastic story, in comparing 7 and 6 together. Each have their strengths and weaknesses. Yet, as much as I adore 6 and it is my favorite Final Fantasy, I do think 7 does a better job of just giving you like a cinematic, epic experience. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the full motion videos and the 3D graphics. And I'm saying that as someone, I know this will get me just like torn apart in some corners of the internet, especially in games. I hate the PS1 graphics. I hate early 3D graphics. Even that said, I have to give it to 7. It's full motion video and it's 3D graphics gave it that expression to get more like, I feel like, emotion and narrative across than what 6 was able to do. I also think, and this is again personal opinion, I think 6 has a story I like more overall, but 7 has by far the better characters to me. But yeah, they're both up there on the pillar for me. Just 6 is a little bit higher, and it's mostly for personal preference. 7 just left, again, a lot of impact on me when it comes to just character and character growth and telling. Again, I still don't like giving spoilers on games, even if they're like 20, 30 years old, because there are people who are like 10, 15 now, that just because something's 50 years old doesn't mean they had 50 years to experience it. I always try and stay light on spoilers, but the character development specifically of like Cloud and Tifa and even like Barrett, how they change and the complexity to them really deep in 7. And again, this is like a game that at the time I couldn't articulate it, but there was something special about these characters, and not just because I thought they're cool or they were funny or I liked their design. A lot of that was true, but it was also my first time of a video game bringing this type of depth and complexity to a character and showing, again, another example of what you can do with this medium when it comes to telling a story and narrative. Now, if you know me personally, you would know I'm a huge history buff. Most of the books on my shelf, probably at least half, if not more, are about history. Like this, 1177 Bronze Age collapse, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, or I have a bunch of books about just specific campaigns in World War II. And a lot of this comes from the impact a game called Command and Conquer Red Alert left on me. It really was like the first thing to fuel that interest I have in specifically that game, military history, but history in general. And if you don't know much about the game, it essentially takes place in an alternative timeline when Hitler is killed and World War II does not start. At least not with Germany, because instead it ends up being the Soviet Union against the Allies.
Herr Hitler?
Ja, was ist los? Ich habe keine Zeit, hier rumzustehen.
Ja, ich verstehe.
Did you find him?
Hitler is out of the way.
Congratulations, Professor. With Hitler removed...
Time will tell. Sooner or later. Time will tell.
Also, it might be the first time I ever headbanged to music as a kid. Hell's March, that intro song is just so good. But Red Alert was also almost certainly my first real-time strategy game, RTS. One of my most cherished game series. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, I always looked for other RTS games in that genre to play. But yeah, Red Alert had a lot of influence when it came to history because it uses some real world people. When I learned like Einstein, which I probably had heard of Einstein by this point, but Einstein, Stalin, I remember like when I realized Stalin in the game, like that's based on a real person, like what? And again, I was probably like 7, 8, so I didn't really know much about like world history, so like learning about World War II, a lot of introduction to geography, learning like what countries were what and countries that existed in the past but don't exist now. And quickly I was like asking my parents about all these people and places, history. I was watching documentaries on TV of like World War II at a young age because of this. And Red Alert just had a bunch of little moments for me where, again, these moments I just add up to a lot of impact. It was really this would have been like the first game that truly like taught me basic elements of strategy. And I do think like real-time strategy, a lot of the times there's not too much strategy. Like if you really get into good at the game, like it's pretty basic. But I remember getting stuck on some missions in the first Red Alert, and I would like try the mission once or twice, fail, and be like, all right, I need to turn the game off, go outside and take a walk. And I grew up on like a big farm, and I would walk outside just running through the mission in my head, like, what can I do differently? What's like defeating me? And I remember a couple times, I don't know why I didn't do this in pen and paper, but I would get a stick and like draw the map in the sand and like be trying to come up in strategies like in the dirt, and then I'll go back and play the mission. And I do remember one specific time I did that, went back and beat the mission after I came back inside, and it just like I just felt so confident. It made me feel like so good. So yeah, it really did teach me, like, you know, really basic strategy about like thinking of how to problem solve in a very direct way, game or issue. Something else where it left a really big impact is progression. And this is usually something you don't think about when it comes to RTS games, but especially in this era, when you played like mission 1, you had very limited and basic units and buildings. And then mission 2, they usually gave you like a new building that unlocks like a new unit or aspect of gameplay. And like getting drip fed that was so cool. I was always excited to get to the next mission to see like what type of units are we gonna get to next. And early on, my first time playing the game, I still remember like, when are we gonna get to tanks? And there's a mission, and I'll cut to it now. We go across this bridge, and I was like, what is that, a tank? And it's actually just a turret, but I thought it was like tanks that were just in place shooting at me. And again, I remember getting like an adrenaline rush, like, oh, we're at tanks. And then like later in that mission, I get to like a building I hadn't seen before, and it was the command center. But like up to this point, you had not seen one. It's just like, what's this building do? What's it build? What's its utility? What's it gonna give me access to? And really, yeah, that like sense of progression was like a fairly like new mechanic to me, and in a lot of those RTSs, it's done in a very direct way because of that. Red Alert was a cornerstone to a lot of games I enjoy, specifically when it comes to modern RTS. When I go through my most played games on Steam, they're all RTS or Grand Strategy, and I think RTS is a stepping stone into Grand Strategy. I, in my 20s, became really invested into Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, Victorica 3, a lot of 4X games, you know, Civilization games, Galactic Civilizations. And a lot of these are because of that foundation I think Red Alert gave me. And an honorable mention along with Red Alert has to be Warcraft 2. So I originally played these games. I had an uncle that built us a Windows 98 PC like early on when it first came out, and he was very tech savvy, especially back then, and I didn't know at the time, but he put like 20 games on this computer, and clearly they were all like pirated, with like no CD cracks and stuff. And as a kid, I didn't know. I was just like, oh, like there's Quake, there's Red Alert, there's Warcraft 2. So I used to play a lot of Warcraft 2. That was another favorite game of mine, but I never did own it on CD-ROM. Red Alert, I ended up getting on CD-ROM, so I was able to like reinstall it. I was able to play it on Windows XP and so on. Warcraft 2, not so much, but Warcraft 2 fills. I would have played it really around the same time as Red Alert 2, but I remember gravitating a little bit more towards Red Alert. All right, next I want to cover Theme Hospital and Classic Maxis. I want to bundle these together because it wasn't so much like one of these had a huge impact with me, although I think Theme Hospital sticks out the most. It's just that in a combination, they all did. And in the 90s, I became a huge fan of simulation games, tycoon games. So a different friend from earlier, but like one of my best friends in like the late 90s, early 2000s, we're always buying those $10 jewel case games. And a lot of times these were like Maxis games or some tycoon games. And me and this friend were always trading games, and we became obsessed with classic Maxis. So I'm talking, you know, SimTown, SimCopter, Streets of SimCity, SimCity itself, Sim Ant, Sim Tower. If it was a Maxis game, we were wanting to play it, and probably one of us had got it at some point. And along with like RTS, these games really cemented a foundation of what I enjoy to play. And part of it goes into, like I was saying earlier, grand strategy games. A lot of these, I just love depth and customization in games, and 4X games are another favorite of mine. And there's like a lot of the foundation started here because again, when as a kid, when like Civilization 1 and 2 were out, like those are too complex for me at the time, but also stuff like that it's like intimidating to get into. Like even modern grand strategy games, I know a lot of people I talk to, like there's like a learning curve, and sometimes that learning curve is not really that bad, but you think it's like this big when it's really like that big. So these games make that foundation. One other thing I think these games left an impact on me was what I like, my sense of humor and what I find funny. Classic Maxis was always usually played in a bit of a serious tone, but they always had like the jokes when it came to, like, you know, llamas or how disasters and stuff would happen. And I think it really hit its peak in the first Sims game. And the quirkiness with Sims, the first one, is fantastic. Like that's like the type of comedy I like to see in the game. But going back to Theme Hospital 2, that really left an impact of like how you can just really tie like that comedy and tone into the gameplay and elements, from like puns to the gameplay mechanics, just its presentation and the jokes within the game. And Theme Hospital, I just thought was hilarious. I thought was super fun. A little bit of a tangent. A lot of the original developers came out with, it's called 2 Point Hospital and now 2 Point Campus. Check them out if you've ever had any interest in Theme Hospital, or if you never knew these games came out. 2 Point Hospitals, came out 2018, I think. Fantastic game, great follow-up to Theme Hospital. But one thing I will always appreciate about these older games too is they just had a certain charm to them, and something that I do think lacks in a lot of simulation games now, or like arcade simulation, however you want to kind of define it. A series I do like, City Skylines, kind of like the modern SimCity, but it's missing a lot of the charm like SimCity 2K, 3K had, SimCity 4 had, and it's because I think it's like too clinical. And again, this is like why these like classic Maxis games left an impact on me. It's like I see these modern games and I can recognize like they're still really good games, but there's that hole that they've still never filled. And again, I'm thinking like an impact crater that classic Maxis left that's never fully been able to fill in, because I've just recognized, again, even if I can't articulate it at the time, but as an adult, it's like there is charming character to those games that very few games in that type of genre have ever been able to replicate. But yeah, there's so much of the foundation of like Mario and Kirby was the foundation of me getting into games and loving gaming. So many of these classic simulation games from like the 90s and like RTS games as well, except the foundation of what I really embraced as I became an adult and gaming became like my favorite hobby to take part in. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is kind of like a 2.5 partnered game, and that is going to be Metal Gear Twin Snakes, which is the remake of the first game, and Metal Gear Solid 2. And I'm kind of combining these all into one. I would have played Twin Snakes and Metal Gear Solid 2 very close to the same time. But yeah, I, again, didn't own a PlayStation 1, but when my brother was living with us, he had his PlayStation 1 and I had Metal Gear Solid. And like a lot of games as a kid, a lot of the topics and themes went over my head, but everyone's really covered this. Other people have covered this really well, but yeah, Kojima clearly is like a lot of him as a filmmaker. He appreciates filmmaking, and you see it in a lot of his games. And it's seriously crazy impressive and how much he gets into the first Metal Gear on like that PlayStation 1 hardware. Like he really wants it to feel like a movie in a lot of ways, and a lot of it's successful, a lot of it's kind of weird, doesn't necessarily work. And you've seen like some of the changes he made in Twin Snakes. Some people love, some people hate. I'm both. Like, there's a lot of the changes in Twin Snakes I both love and hate. But yeah, the first Metal Gear, I watched my brother's playthrough, and again, it just impacted me so much when it came to watching some of the meta stuff in the game, like having to change the controller port in the Psycho Mantis fight, seeing a little bit of like other fourth wall breaking stuff. And when specifically that alone wouldn't have been enough to make it get on my list, it would have been memorable to me. But when I got a GameCube, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I ended up going to my buddy's house. So I knew the first game well enough because I'd watched my brothers play through it. And I had never actually played it. I used to just watch them play. And I played Metal Gear Solid 2. And that game just blew me away. And just all of the themes. And again, I would have been 12 or 13 at this point. So I was able to understand a lot of it, even though some of it still went over my head. It's the first game. The ending of 2 was like the first game to give me like a bit of an existential crisis, like this. And even during the game, some of the stuff it was bringing up, like this was probably the first game that again taught me like what another step of narrative a video game can be, because I started to think about like real world stuff. And of course, I was a dumb kid, but I wasn't that dumb. When the game talks about like the Patriots, like the U.S. being ran by a group of like 12 shadow men, or essentially like a shadow government, like that was a concept. Like again, I probably had Kirby before, but you know, if I was watching a movie, you know, I was like half invested or half going over my head. One thing I appreciate about video games is you have to be invested. You're controlling the agency of the game and the narrative. So playing the game, and especially with the theme of Metal Gear Solid 2, you become a lot more aware about the theme and narrative. And again, I knew like it wasn't real, but it's just like, man, like some of the stuff this game is bringing up is like giving me like anxiety, and it just opened my mind up to all this possibility of narrative and storytelling. And again, I think that encompasses the first one in Twin Snakes as well. I really add Twin Snakes here because after I played 2, I got Twin Snakes for my GameCube and played it, and that's when I really, like, for myself got to experience the first one. And because I really didn't play the first one until much, much later myself. Again, I watched it played a lot, but yeah, I have to add the first 2 Metal Gear specifically. I would add 3, but by the time I got to 3, that, you know, we're kind of getting out of the scope of this video for my age. But the first 2 Metal Gears just took storytelling to the next level for me, and gave me feelings I just never ran into playing a game before. I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to bring up Animal Crossing for the GameCube, so the first one. And that is because it changed the concept of what a game could be to me. And the last game I talked about also kind of did this, but I'll save my thoughts for that, obviously, for the end. But this was one of the first games I ended up saving up and getting for on my GameCube. After I got the GameCube for a Christmas present, I probably got this like sometime in March. I had fully built this game up in my head of all what it could be, because I'd read about it in like magazines, and I remember like reading like the back of the box and stuff, and thinking like, oh, you can like make your own life, and it blew me away. Like, the world is living, like the game continues after you turn it off. Like, people will like move out or move in when the game's not running, and that was so fascinating to me. You've got mail, there's holidays, etc. And now I really let that like blow the game up a lot in my head. I think obviously like as I played the game and as you play like Animal Crossing game, it's like, all right, it's not quite, especially as a kid, what it was thought it was gonna be. And I'm gonna touch more on like this concept again in the next game I'm about to talk about. But even that said, when I played Animal Crossing, it was just eye-opening. One of the most cherished games I have. Like, really bringing that idea of like we have a living world. The game plays with or without you, and you feel, and it's one of the first times like in a game I felt a lot more like a character in the game than kind of the puppet master, even though you still basically are the puppet master. Just give this game its little spotlight in this video because it truly left an impact of like what games can be. And a good, I think, metric of this is it's one of those games when like there's a newer game coming out, especially if it's an indie game. If you say, oh, it's like Animal Crossing or it's like if you have Animal Crossing and you added this or changed this. Like when a game becomes that much of a staple, like it's the yardstick you compare it to, like that's impactful. Now the Total War series, specifically Shogun Total War and Rome Total War, which you can see both in their big boxes right behind me. I still remember getting a phone call Christmas Day. So this is like my best friend in the late 90s, early 2000s. The one I used to play like all the classic Maxis games with, the World Trade games. And we're talking about like, you know, stuff we got, specifically like, oh, did he get any new games? And he starts talking about this game he got that's set in feudal Japan. He's controlling armies of hundreds of men. You can see the soldiers fighting one-on-one on the battlefield. Between battles, you're managing your nation by building like structures, managing the kingdom, doing diplomacy. And he's like, yeah, and I just sent my ninja on a mission and he just killed like the enemy general. And I was just like, what? Like, this sounds like the greatest game ever. Like, I have to come over and play this. And I remember going over, it was probably like the next day to watch him play it and like play it myself. And after I got off the phone with him, I remember thinking like, this sounds too good to be true. And what I was talking about with Animal Crossing just before is, especially I think as a kid you do this, you kind of like stop doing this as you kind of get smarter basically. But you sometimes build games up, and I think a lot of it is your imagination runs wild, but I think a lot of it is also these times like in the 90s and early 2000s, games were just taking huge leapfrogs in what they could be graphically, gameplay, size. You know, the scope of games could get so much bigger, where you could do a ton. So like that mixed with like that kind of child teen imagination would be talking about games before they came out, and you build them up so much. And I specifically remember, because you know, I was like in my early teens at this point, probably like 11, 12, and thinking like, I'm probably building this up in my head. I went over and played, and it's the first time I had really let something build up, and I felt like it basically was true. Especially for this period of time in gaming, there was nothing like Shogun. Like, you're not literally controlling like one person at a time. You know, you control like a battalion or a company. I don't know what the correct terminology would be, but like a group of like 80 men as a unit. But like you can see like all the little guys fighting, and Shogun is still pretty primitive, where it's not like one-on-one, which later like Rome was like the first one where it's like units fought one-on-one. Like it did like the math where it's like the guy swung his sword, it calculated like if he hit or missed and if it killed the guy, etc. But it just like the scope of the Total War series, especially in the beginning, was just amazing to me. And that was compounded by, I never did play the one between them, the first medieval Total War, but when Rome came out, again, that just elevated it again another shot, because when Rome came out, this was at a time when, you know, games were really starting to, I think, finally look good, but you either had that like large out scope, like a Civilization, an RTS, where, you know, the game still looked good, but we're like zoomed out, or you're playing like a first person shooter or RPG where it looks good, but you're zoomed in like at character level. And of course, Rome didn't look that good zoomed in at character level, but it was like the first game where it looked good both. And it like, again, the impact it left on me, it's like I'm zoomed out watching all these guys fight, and I could zoom in and see the soldiers swinging at each other and falling in battle, is something that just never left me. And it was a watermark in gaming for me, where it's like, this is the first time I've been able to see this, and like, this is the future. And it was so good. They did a TV show where they used the Rome engine to simulate classic battles. And I'm sure I haven't watched that show like way back when it came out in like 2004 or 5. I'm sure it probably hasn't aged the best, but it just points out that during this time, the impact that game had with its like graphic fidelity, its complexity with combat and mechanics, was just something really, really cool to see and be around. And especially that time being like a young teenager, that impact was even more, like, I think, highlighted for me. I also think these games, going back to like those edutainment games on Windows 3.1, these games taught me so much about geography. I'm not kidding. There was classes in high school and even college where we would start talking about, the teacher would be teaching us about something, and I was like, oh, I know this because I played Rome. But it like educated me on geography and history, and especially geography. Geography class, I had 2 in college I had to take that were just so much easier for me because of how many Total War games I played. Empire, Total War, Shogun, well, not so much Shogun, but like Rome, medieval. It's just like, oh, I know where a lot of these cities are. I know where a lot of these like countries are. Even if the countries don't exist, it's like, oh, I know like what some of these countries like turned into. So yeah, it left like some practical real world impact for me as well. The final game I want to touch on had probably the biggest impact on me because it's the most serious one, and more of these than one, and that is, funnily enough, The Sims. I think unironically, the first Sims game helped me become a better person in a really weird and fucked up way. I've told the story to a few people, and they always are like, that is kind of messed up, but kind of sweet at the same time. A little bit of backstory to just, again, let you know why I probably had like some of these like views and flaws with myself is I grew up in rural Michigan. I graduated 39 kids in my class. The class behind me is only 27. My high school was pre-K to 12th grade, all one building. It was like 4 wings, like 4 hallways in this like weird like F kind of shape. And that's public school, and we're usually like around 650 kids pre-K to 12th grade, so very rural, small community. So I was playing this game, it would have been like 2000, 2001, so it would have been probably 11, maybe 12 when I first played The Sims. And again, my really good friend that we played Maxis games with, his older brother had purchased The Sims shortly after it came out. And I went over there. And it's like one of those games that the game itself, regardless of this, the game, I'm not even going to touch on this too much because I want to talk about the story, but the game itself left a big impact on me again. It's just another example of what games could be. Like, no open-ended goals or anything, kind of get to do your stuff, simulation of people, really cool. So we played this game a lot, talked about it a lot, and I finally got a version, probably, again, this probably is like late 2001, we got our Windows XP computer, an SCD burner, and at some point, like, I was able to burn a copy of his CD, get no CD crack. Later on, I bought the game legit, but I was playing this game, and being The Sims, I make a character that is a pure self-insert of myself, because at that age of like 11, 12, I still essentially didn't know how to roleplay. Like, I'm someone who really likes to roleplay now. I'll like come up with character concept, play in the game, but this was the time when it's like, oh, this character is me. So I put like the version of my character of myself in this character and start playing. And The Sims, again, I remember, so when I would play at my buddy's house, it's like one of those games you usually didn't play that much with your friend. It sometimes wasn't like super exciting watching a friend play, so it's like, oh, like, here's my house, and then he'll maybe let me play for like 30 minutes or so. So when I had it, point is like, I'm really starting to experience the game and see what all it has to offer. So I like make my family in the game. I have like a wife, and I think I had like 1 or 2 kids, and I have a house. And at this time, it kind of speaks to like being young and like this era in gaming. Like, it going back to like Red Alert, it was always exciting to see like that little progression. So in The Sims, like, as you built a relationship up with another character, it unlocked like different animations that, you know, you can't just do something that requires like a relationship of at least like 60 points when you first meet them. So part of the game for me at that time was just like, oh, I've never seen dance, I've never seen hug. So I'm like I have my sim interact just to see these animations. And at the time, I'm like throwing a bunch of parties in the game, because that's what like 11, 12-year-old me did in The Sims. Like, we're gonna have a party every night. And I still remember Mortimer Goth, one of like the pre-made Sims, kept coming over, and like my Sim was interacting with him, and the relationship built up, and I see Embrace, and I click it, and Embrace is like a romantic relationship interaction. And I remember they Embrace, and it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then I was just like, oh, I remember I started playing like the wife, controlling the wife. And then I go back and look over to play like my character, and then I see him and Mortimer Goth kiss. And this just horrified me. And again, these are views I no longer hold anymore. And I think the thing about this game, it kind of pointed out like a flaw within me, was I became like upset that in my mind, Mortimer was gay and he kissed me, who was not gay. And this was the first time, again, this is where the story kind of gets fucked up. I built a 2x2 box around Mortimer and let him starve to death and die. And again, it's like fucked up. But as soon as he died, and again, it's just a fucking character in a game, but this was like me experiencing something about myself, I truly believe at the time. And something that I think is a flaw, or was a flaw. I don't have it anymore. But as soon as that Sim died, I got just overwhelmed with guilt. I felt like I knew I did something wrong. And again, I want to get ahead of like some of, I'm sure, comments and what people might say. Of course, I don't have guilt over killing people in games, like in first-person shooters, and just like playing a game and experiencing a game and doing bad things in a game. I like to play tabletop RPGs where I'm like an evil character. But there is a difference between role-playing and understanding, like, this is evil and it's like fucked up, but I'm just having fun, to it's like I'm acting on real personal emotions. And when that Sim died, Mortimer Goth, I felt so bad. I stopped playing, and I couldn't go back to that save. I had to delete that save and start over again. And again, this wasn't something I had an epiphany with. And I don't mean just this to sound like all rule people are ignorant, whatever. Like, again, these are my people. This is I grew up in fucking Hillsdale, Michigan, of all places. But like, their stereotypes are a reason, and yeah, you're gonna find a lot of ignorance, especially at that time. You know, we're 2001, 2002, America in the rural area, where people were very ignorant, and unfortunately, many still are, around gay marriage and LGBTQ people. And at the time, I would have, even through high school, I would have told you it was anti-gay marriage. I didn't think it was right. Again, I don't believe any of that now. My partner, she identifies as being queer. I have nothing but like love and respect for a lot of queer, gay, lesbian, whatever you perceive yourself as people. And I think it's really fucked up that I went through this growth through like my teens, and by the time I got in college, it really faded away. In my early mid-20s, it was like all gone, and I realized like those flaws. And to kind of stay on The Sims, this moment never left me. I used to go back and sometimes reflect on it. It wasn't like every day or every week or every month, but like this moment, like there'll just be random times that would pop up, or especially if there's something going on around gay marriage or LGBTQ plus culture. When I was like in high school or like early college, sometimes this would pop back up into my head, and I just think it left that impact of like, I unconsciously had recognized a huge character flaw within myself, and it was this very unfortunate and awful thing I had that was like disgust for like gay people in this instance. And I have always appreciated The Sims, looking back at it, just specifically for this moment, because that never left me and was part of the, because it's like one of those things when I would get into a discussion around like gay marriage, and like someone would just ask like, why do you care? And like that is a question I never had like a good answer to when I was like ignorant at the time. And this was like a moment that would sometimes like play in my mind, of just like, yeah, that there's no reason I should have had like those emotions in me at the time were not right and didn't feel good. And even if it's just in a video game. So yeah, this definitely is like one of the more serious things. And since then, you know, going back to like when I was talking about like Red Alert, like I became a big fan of military history. I've since become a huge proponent on the old adage, World War I adage, live and let live. Like, let people do what they want. Let people be happy. Someone's romance, sexual preference is no skin off my ass. And it's like one of those things, like I can find different types of relationships like weird or strange or whatever. Like that's even fine. But having like disgust for them in that way I did back then is a character flaw, and something I, again, I'm thankful video games were able to like bring to, like, it brought the ugliness right to me that never left my mind and always stuck with me. So yeah, The Sims was the first little step in, I think, me becoming a better person by accepting that was a flaw, and being like, later in life being like, I need to come to terms with why I feel this way and get over it and mature and educate myself. And I fortunately did. But yeah, that is the video. There it ends a little bit dark, but it ends in a good way. It's a dark story, but was the transition to me, I think, becoming a better person. And there are so many other games I could talk about, but now it would be getting out of the scope of like me being like a kid or a teenager to kind of being a young adult, you know, games like To the Moon, Spec Ops: The Line, Baldur's Gate 3, Neverwinter Nights. The list goes on of many games that have still like left big impacts or touched me since. Now we all have different experiences, and I think it is, and a lot of those experiences are always going to be like valid and how games impacted you as a kid. Whether it's like non-important stuff of you playing a Final Fantasy game for the first time, now you're just a big Final Fantasy person, like in the like that, like that's cool, but obviously that's like something that's not important. To games I think impacting us where they teach you about geography, history, they maybe teach you about yourself, like The Sims did with me, highlighting the good and bad aspects of you. I didn't touch on it, but To the Moon is a game that really taught me and highlighted the concepts of romanticism and realism and like those clashing. That's a game, you know, I experienced as an adult that I truly appreciate. So with all that said, I would love to hear about games that impacted you as a kid or a teenager growing up in any of these ways, or did any of the games I have impact you? Were they in the same way? Were they in different ways? Please leave comments below letting me know, or make a video and link it in the comment below. I would love to either watch it or read about it. And as always, I'm Filbert. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And one last thing, join me on Twitch, follow me on Twitch if you haven't already. Links in the description and my about page. Right now I kind of stream on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, Monday nights, and it always varies, so keep an eye out. I try and keep my schedule posted and updated on my Twitch page. But yeah, I would love to have more people come hang out, play games with me, just chat while I play games and have any type of discussion you want. Catch you later.